My name is Luke Bell. I'm a Christian, and I'm here to share some of the things I learned, particularly as one who had taught masonry in a technical college in Alabama, and then was called to preach and moved from Alabama to North Carolina to go to Duke University Divinity School and pastor at the same time at a little church above Chapel Hill. And as I was learning and reading the scripture, and in my classes, I started noticing a difference between the church that Jesus is building and the one we seem to build, and across time and history. And so, searching the scriptures, I'd like for the listener to consider some of the things. When Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, starting with the 13th verse, Jesus said, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they say, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, Hades, shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he commanded his disciples that they should tell no one that he was Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. So the gates of hell will not prevail against the church that Jesus is building. And yet, going to seminary and as a new pastor, I'm wondering, with some 30-something, now 40-something thousand denominations, there's a disconnect with what he said then and the experience across church history presently and to this moment. So the question I have is, why is that? And of course, on this rock I will build my church. So as a Mason, I couldn't help but start wondering scripturally, what does that mean? Implications from my background as a Mason. Well, that led me to Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks, and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. I just find it interesting as a Christian, and particularly from a masonry background, they built, "Come let us build," with brick. And so brick are manufactured, and I put the emphasis on that because they could have had stone, they might not have had stone, but let's make out of brick and build the Tower of Babel. The two things they wanted to do was make a name for themselves, that's pride, and lest they be scattered, and that was fear. But the thing of it is, in the life of the church, the temptation is still to this day is to build out of brick. And by that I mean brick are quick. Brick are left brain. Brick are logical and rational. All you have to do is straight, level, and plumb. You always know where you are. The brick are interchangeable. You don't have to guess what brick. You can go into another wall and take it and change it. And when we get to stone, we'll see a world of difference. But in brickwork, this wall behind me, if I were to brick it up by myself, if I had a good labor, I could probably do it in a day, maybe a day and a half. However, when we leave brick behind and stone, because in the scripture, always, throughout the whole of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, God always builds out of stone. And his point, he's always pointing to the living stones, as Peter said, and we saw that passage. But the point of the matter is you have to go from your left brain, or rational side, the logical side, to the right side, a more intuitive, artistic, creative side, and a more listening side to something beyond oneself, a revelational side, I would say, to stone. And every stone can't be interchanged. They must be in direct relationship with other stones around them. And so stones have to be shaped. Like this stone here does not have a base for the next stone to rest upon it. So it would have to be split and shaped in order to make sure it fits and relates to the other stones around it. And so there's no sense of church hopping with the church Jesus is building, because he is the Lord and he is the chief cornerstone, and he calls us to be in his church to relate to him and those other living stones around us. Whereas in a brick, you can do anything you want and relate any way you want. And that's not much of a relationship if we're doing it the way we want instead of according to his love and mercy. Peter finally gets it when he says over in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 to 10, he says, coming to him, Jesus, as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious. You also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Therefore, it's also contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame. Therefore, to you who believe, he is precious. But to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumble, being disobedient to the word, to which they also were appointed. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who were once not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. The point of the fact that the early church understood the faith, the Christian faith, is relational, not institutional. And by institutional, I mean programmatic. It's not a program, it's about the people. And this is where the paradigm understanding's got to become prevalent in the life of the church, or we will continue to build the church with brick. And by that, again, mean institutional, organizationally. No, it's not an organization, it's an organism, a living organism. It's not about programs, it's about people. It's not about reason, it's about faith. Christianity in the early church, the first 300 years before they were institutionalized by Constantine in 313 with the Edict of Milan and made politically correct to be a Christian. Up to that point, there were 10 persecutions from the time of Christ and the early church to Constantine's coming. Then they were living stones. They had no buildings, they had no priesthood, and they had no sacrifice, because Jesus fulfilled them all. In fact, the earliest Christians up to that point were called atheists by the pagans and by the Jews, because they didn't have a priesthood or a sacrifice or a temple. I find it interesting, I'm remembering about a fellow by the name of Colin Williams. We use one of his textbooks. I recall he's a theologian from Australia. But he was in charge, or very much a part of the evangelism group as far as the World Council of Churches, and they met back in the early 60s. It might have been New Delhi, India, I forgot where. But anyway, they were meeting and discussing evangelizing of the world and building up of the church. And somehow or another, as I remember reading, some Christians from inside East Germany made it to this meeting. And they were excited about the fact that they were finding new life in their churches. And of course, everyone was asking them, well, how can that be? You're in a East German communist country. How can that be? And it's, oh, you're right. They took away all of our buildings and all of our structures, but we're meeting underground like the early church. And there's a new faith. There's a new vibrancy in our churches. And so that caused the wider body in the organization of the evangelism of the World Council of Churches to discuss, oh, wait a minute, is there such a thing as, because they were all admitting the fact they weren't seeing that kind of excitement and growth spiritually and faith-wise. So they were discussing, is there something, another kind of heresy besides doctrinal heresy? Is it possible that there's heretical structures? That brings the question up that we were talking about between the rock and the brick, is the structures. And I remember Marshall McLuhan said some years ago when I was in junior college, 50-something years ago, the medium is the message. And I've wondered about that all these years and come to find out how the message is packaged. The package becomes the message, and the message is actually lost in the translation. And that might have been the lament of this evangelism group at the World Council of Churches. Certainly, we always have a choice. The church to be built that Jesus has built, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it, are built out of living stones. It is relational, it's about faith, and it's not about institutional concerns and a brick job, and its only purpose is its own preservation of itself as an institution. Well, how can the church preach faith if it doesn't live by faith? Again, Marshall McLuhan's point, the medium is the message or becomes the message and not the faith. And so we are not just talking about churches, but our lives, our marriages, our families, our institution. Are they built relationally on faith or are they built on the lie, which is about self-preservation? And so there's no hope in that. There's no life in that. There's no meaning in that. And there's no peace or joy in that, I've discovered. And so going back to the scripture that Jesus says, if you love me, obey my commandments. John 14:15. Peter, upon this rock, not Peter himself, but on this confession of faith of who Jesus is, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, hell, will not prevail against it.